everybody, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm talking about romance and smut. So this is a video that I actually wanted to make last year sometime, and pregnancy at that point was kicking my butt, and then we got out of February, and like, yes, we can talk about romance all the time, but it was something I, for some reason, wanted to make around February, so we're doing it this year. This is not supposed to be any sort of like, this thing is good, this thing is bad. I titled it romance versus smut just because I thought that would be interesting, but this is more of a sit-down talking video about things that I have noticed in the book community, and I just wanted to sort of talk about that because, like, anybody can read romance. I personally identify as demisexual. I've talked about that many times on my channel, and the thing is, I sometimes feel like the romance community on not necessarily booktube, but sometimes bookstagram and book Twitter, because I'm not on TikTok, can be a little harsh sometimes with what they consider a romance. And it's almost always people being like, if your book doesn't have sex, it's not a romance. Or if your book doesn't have them having a kiss within 30 pages, it's not a romance. And like, that's obviously not what the criteria is for a romance. And so I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a little sensitive in general, like, my feelings are a little bit hurt because that's not how this is. And I have some friends even that every so often they'll put memes on their, like, bookstagram, you know, stories, and they're supposed to be harmless, and usually they are, but this is just something that I've seen more and more, is people really wanting smut and sex scenes in books, and then getting mad or feeling like if you don't want those in your books, you're not a real romance reader. And I feel like that's just not something that we should do, because I can definitely appreciate a good sex scene in a book, but you don't need it in there to have a romance. I personally need a romance to appreciate a sex scene. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we have two different things going on here. Smut is something that can definitely be in romance, but it can also be 100% in erotica. And I feel like romance and erotica are two very different things that are closely related. You know what I mean? Romance is usually something where you get to see the romantic relationship build up between two characters, or more if you're into like poly romance, that kind of stuff, which is great. I've read my fair share, you know, but you get to see these romantic feelings build up. There could be sex, there could be not. Erotica, the sex is the main plot line. Romance is usually the main plot line of a romance. There could be other things, like you can have romance that is also fantasy romance or sci-fi romance, where there is an extra part of the story that is not just related to characters falling in love. But erotica, the sex is the story. And I feel like sometimes people mistake those two things. Like when they want smut, sometimes they want erotica, but sometimes they mention they want a romance and then they get mad that the romance doesn't have enough smut in it. You know what I mean? And this is just something that I feel like I wanted to talk about. One thing is that romance doesn't have to have sex. I don't personally like the term clean romances. I know some people still use them. I would prefer either like closed door or fade to black, or just this book doesn't have any smut or sex or spice, you know, however you want to label it. But like, you can have a romance, a good romance that doesn't have sex in it. You also then have the books that don't have the play-by-plays. You know what I mean? Like, if you want smut, I'm assuming that you want the play-by-play. P goes in V and this is how they do it. You know what I mean? But there have been some really good romances that I have really enjoyed where the sex is more based on emotions. I think Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall, and I'm thinking also Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Those are the two that are coming up right now at the top of my head that I'm pretty sure do it this way, where you technically are getting into a sex scene, but it's more about how they feel in the moment versus what their bodies are doing. Does that make sense? So I guess technically for those ones, people that are looking for smut are going to be disappointed. They're not overly smutty. They could be sexy. Like, I feel like that is what I would prefer. I don't usually prefer a play-by-play. I 100% do not like dirty talk. It squicks me out so much. I cringe internally. But if the romance is really, really good, if I get to see the two characters come together and like that relationship built up, I can forgive a little bit of weirdness in the sex scenes. But that also means I'm that person that doesn't want a sex scene first. Usually, like, I do not gravitate toward the stories that are like, oh, we had a one-night stand, here's the sex scene, and then eventually we develop feelings. That's just not me. But like, you can have smut in your romances. One thing, and again, I'm probably going all over the board here because my brain goes like this. One thing that this makes me think of in this conversation is Ice Planet Barbarians. I have seen many people classify this series as smut. And the thing is, I personally think smut is not a genre. Smut is something that is in romance or erotica. Those are genres that you could classify. You can classify a romance versus an erotica, but they could both technically have smut in them. Yes, Ice Planet Barbarians does have sex scenes in it. And when you see this cover, it definitely seems like this is an erotica series that is full of smut. When you see this cover, it's a nice sci-fi romance. There are still sex scenes in it, but this cover is actually what this book is. We actually have a hard-hitting start to this series with the women being kidnapped from Earth by aliens that want to do them harm and even rape them. Like, it is not good at the beginning. And again, this is the indie version versus the traditionally published. I have not reread it as a traditionally published book yet, so I don't know if they've taken out a bunch of scenes or not. But it starts off very hard-hitting. They then end up crash landing on an ice planet and having to survive. It is also a survival story. And then, yes, we do have some sex. We definitely have romance, though. You can see it building between the characters. And so I liked this story. I think I gave this one a 4 out of 5, and every book that I've read so far since this one has actually gotten a little bit higher in star ratings, because I do really love the romance and the characters and the fact that they are still trying to survive on this planet. You know what I mean? So like, when you see these two covers, I can understand why somebody's like, I want smut, and people are recommending Ice Planet Barbarians. It does have smut in it, but like, when you're saying that you only want to read something for smut and people are trying to recommend something that also does have romance, or I've actually seen it also when people are talking about how they only want really dirty stories, they want like the smuttiest smut ever. This is not technically that. You know what I mean? These books have sex in them. They have smut in them. But romance is not synonymous with smut. It is not the exact same thing. Because then you also have romances, like I mentioned before, boyfriend material, red, white, and royal blue. Those kind of things, that those scenes aren't going to be a play-by-play. It's not going to be the main focus. Or you have things like Well Met by Jen DeLuca, where you end up having that romantic build-up first, and then yeah, there's a sex scene, but it's not halfway through the book. That's another thing that I've seen, is people saying, if your book doesn't have sex by the 30% mark or by the 50% mark, you're not a romance. You can't classify it by that. Romance is classified by a romantic relationship building up between the characters and a happily ever after at the end. Or at least a happy for now if it's going to be like an actual series. That's romance. Nowhere does it say you have to have sex on page. And this is just something that I've noticed and wanted to talk about before, because I do identify as demisexual. The thing is, I also know people who do read romance sometimes who are asexual and would prefer not to read sex on page at all. That doesn't mean that they don't read romance. It just means they don't want sex. They don't want smut. These are two things that are not interchangeable. And I think that's the reason I wanted to mention this, is that people use it on BookTube and BookTwitter and Bookstagram as an interchangeable thing. If you want a romance, that means you're obviously going to be reading sex. That is not a given. It shouldn't be a given. If you want a romance, you want a romance. So then we also have books that are like very, very slow burn, like Mariana Zapata. There's like hardly ever sex in those until maybe the last chapter. And so people sometimes look down on books like that because they're not in it for the slow burn romance, which, I mean, if you're reading a Mariana Zapata, I'm hoping that you will go into it knowing that it's a slow burn romance and not a romance that you were expecting to get sexy very, very quickly, because those are like hundreds of pages, and usually it's very slow burn until near the end, which I love. I love the pining and the angst and the like, will they, won't they, and then they get it. You know what I mean? Like, I do love that. But like, if you're looking for a romance, expecting smut, those aren't gonna work for you. So I hope this is making sense and is not too rambly, because I literally have nothing written down here. This is just thoughts from my head. Something that I've noticed in the last, obviously, over a year ago, because I was gonna do this last February, of stuff that is becoming more prevalent in the book community. People sort of putting out these like memes and things talking about how if a romance book doesn't have sex or doesn't have, you know, something by a certain point, that it doesn't count, or that readers that read romances that don't have sex aren't actually reading romances. And I just wanted to say that's not true. I definitely feel that as a negative sometimes when people post those things. Like, I don't know, it gets me a little bit defensive. Like, I think defensive is the best word, because I know for a fact that I'm reading romances, and I don't like that people are being judgy about what other people are reading, especially since technically they're wrong. You know what I mean? It is a romance. If you're looking for smut, say that you're looking for smut. I'm sure there are tons of people that have very sexy recommendations for you, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be erotica, because I know you can have smut in a romance without erotica, but you can also have romance without the smut. Yeah, I think we're gonna end it here today. It's something that I needed to get off my chest. I don't do these rambly videos very often because I do feel like I ramble a lot. I hope you guys liked this one. Let me know down below where you stand on this conversation. Do you like those sexy books? Are you okay with like closed door scenes, fade to black scenes? Like, what kind of romance reader are you? Because again, they're all romance. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more videos. I currently have videos coming out Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will see you then. Bye!